Hi there, and welcome to the Hemet Film Festival. I'm one of your co-hosts and co-founders, Gabriel Diaz, and today I'm speaking with Wesley Houdyshell, who is also a co-founder. And how would you describe yourself, Wesley?
Yeah, I guess co-founder and just general helper, trying to get this first one launched as safely as possible. I did set up the insurance for it, so I feel like I'm responsible for someone to not sue the theater if they break a leg.
Yeah, which might be, maybe the most important job if you're really
I
thinking
think
about it.
liability, it's a real thing.
But we put you in the world of actor, musician, like just multi-talent across the board on a lot of things that you've worked on. There's been a lot of art that you've put your hand into. Is there anything that stands out that maybe people don't always talk about or recognize that it's something that you passionately care about?
No, that's probably the main thing. I feel like the past few years, it's been a lot less of that putting it out there output and more just kind of like doing stuff either privately or just kind of like messing around, because I think I've just been kind of focusing on different like life things. But yeah, like it was, being in Hemet and being in California, like that chapter of my life was like really fruitful in that way, because I think it's hard to grow up in a place so close to LA. I think there's something about that too, or like being in Southern California, where I think even if you're in a place like Hemet, it's hard to not want to be playing guitar or like working on films or these things that are almost like, if you're not into sports or stuff, that almost is like the fallback of like, oh, well, this is an interest, and this is kind of what I feel like I have easy access to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It kind of has like California almost has its own microcosm version of the like I'm going to move to like to New York and be a star. It's like when you're in California, it's like the city is LA. That's the place you're like. That's like, oh man, I'm feeling this vibe. That's where I got to go.
Yeah, and being so close to it, because like in Hemet, right, we're like an hour and some change from it, and you can go to the concerts, go to the films, the plays, whatever you want to do, and it's like big stuff. It's like it's stuff people move across the country for, like to try and be a part of that experience. So I think being adjacent to it in Hemet, you get a little bit of that in the air, like whether you think you're going to go big or not. It's as simple as like the garage shows that like you play when you're in high school, or like stuff like that, or even what the music shop is doing on Harvard Street, like really supporting that youth band culture that I think is uniquely American, like the rock band, right? Like being in a garage with people and electric guitars and everything. I feel like that's a pretty, yeah, it's like, it's a special thing for sure.
Well, there's the higher level conversation, right, about like commiserating is one of the most common like ways to connect with people, and being like a teen learning music and being in a garage band with like a couple other friends, there's all of a sudden this communal understanding of that angst everyone's feeling. So it's like, how do you not form connections that are meaningful from that?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. It's like a great way to make friends. It's a great way to socialize, and it's a great way to feel like you're like a part of a community, which I think at the end of the day is all like any human really wants, is to feel kind of like accepted and seen.
And I think that that's a really good conversation to lead into sort of your background in music. So we know the Hippie Cream connection. That's kind of where I met you and kind of understood, was working on Marty's Magnificent Day-Glo Dream-A-Thon, and kind of introduced through that. Where did you sort of start cutting your teeth into that? Did you pretty quickly go with them? Did you have your own sort of trying out music and bands before that? Like, how did it go?
It was pretty probably typical for like any, like a lot of Hemet kids now, I think, who get into music, where like you have some friends in high school and then you just start like going to practices, or they need a bass player. So you're like, well, I can figure out bass, or I have a bass. So, I started out doing that with friends, and then my brother always did Hippie Cream, but I always felt like it was really weird and I didn't really get it, and I was kind of creeped out by it. So I just always kind of like was like, oh, here's this funny song you wrote about like something weird. And it was more novelty. And then as I got a little older and I kept playing in bands, and like, just nothing big. It was always like Hemet shows, or like if you were lucky, you get to play in a place like Escondido or San Diego or LA. Like, you'd book these like kind of Hemet adjacent cities in the Inland Empire, and you'd be like, all right, cool, we're playing an out of town show. And then I got into Hippie Cream just kind of when I turned 21 and I could start like drinking beers, because I felt like that was kind of the barrier, like to get into it. And it kind of just stuck from there. Like, I just liked the community. I liked playing music. I liked music, and I liked the idea of bands and just kind of doing original music, whether it like made money or not, because it definitely didn't make money, but it was like fun, you know?
That's a fascinating point. I think something that I'll speak to the listeners on this whole Hemet Film Festival is we want to touch into that point that people are like creative in Hemet and they're just a little far away sometimes from things. It's like, this can be a great building ground for creatives of any type to really explore their environment and realize there's tons of you around that are like creative and maybe are feeling a little adrift or out there, and like, this is a chance to shine.
Yeah, I think Hemet is such an amazing breeding ground for like talented people or people interested in the arts, because I think you can sometimes feel a little bit just bored, at least I felt when you're younger in Hemet, you know, just trying to like kind of figure out your place, or like just kind of get through to, like we talked, like people kind of have this idea of like, I want to get out of Hemet, but also the people you meet along the way and the connections you make are very unique in that town. Because there are so many people interested in the arts. And I think it's so ripe for like developing that community more, as opposed to just thinking, how can I get to LA? How can I get to a bigger city? I think it's definitely more about looking inward. And I think that's why the film festival is so great, because it's going to give a new platform for creative people in the town to like showcase their work and get the chance to have that experience of like, yeah, sure, maybe you're not like going to be the next big thing in the mainstream, but at least you can have the chance to showcase your work on a big screen, which I think is a cool experience, no matter what, whether you spend $10 on it or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in doing these conversations, I think what stands out to me is there was such a time of focusing on survival. That was like what Hemet felt like sometimes when you're young, is just you're surviving it. And then eventually you get old enough that you look backwards and realize there's this incredible environment and history and connections, like you said, that you make that you didn't even realize you were necessarily establishing along the way. So I think that's a really poignant thing to bring up, Wes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's important. It's like, I think it's like you make all, like you're so focused on getting away when you're younger. And then once you're gone, we were talking about this before we started recording, but this idea of like Hemet almost becomes this weird North Star without even you realizing it, where it's like, as you move through life, you're constantly kind of finding associations to Hemet in this unexpected way. And you're like, wow, all I cared about when I was in high school was like getting out of here. And yet all these people I met and these experiences I had are so grounded in that town. And it was actually really, really formative and special.
So with the Hippie Cream connection, you start to roll into there. How long do you, so 21, you start with them. How long do you start kind of performing along that path with them?
We started doing gigs around then as well. So I feel like we were like gigging as much as you can with a band of 6, and like 4 of those guys are like married teachers with like young babies.
Which is surprisingly a lot still.
It is, yeah, it is. It was impressive. But we did like a decent enough amount of gigging for probably like 3 or 4 years. And then, yeah, I think we just got way more into doing like just recording, because that was the fun, was getting everyone together for the weekend and spending 3 days and like recording a record, you know. That became a lot more fun than trying to coordinate these kind of shows where no one was showing up, or it was just, you know, like it's fun to get like drunk and play gigs, but then it starts to get to a point where you're like, okay, where are we building? And then the studio was just a lot more fun to experiment in, and you could expand the sound and try stuff. And that just became way more the focus of the band. So I feel like it really evolved into that, and it never really went back, because there wasn't the desire, you know. I think making the piece, making the album and the memento became more important than the gig, which was done. And then everyone had to drive home and go to work the next day.
Oh, that's a fascinating thought process on that. So something I want to ask you about on that then is, how did you sort of cut your teeth on not only the recording and doing of the music, but did you have sort of a training or a schooling? Did you sort of just ad hoc it? Like, how did you build up that repertoire of understanding?
I think you just try stuff, you know, like I did do piano lessons for a few years. I did violin lessons for a few years. Like I tried to get like quote unquote like technically proficient or understand theory better. But it was always kind of like I'd get really hot on it for like 6 months. And then and the thing about getting genuinely good at an instrument, you have to, in my opinion, really be at it from an early age and consistently be into it, right? You're not like I'd get really hot on playing bass for like 2 years, right? Be in bands, go for it. And then I played violin really a lot for 2 years. And then I got into piano for like 2 years. And it's good. These things add up to make you understand music a little bit better. But I would never say I'm really, really good at any of those things. So there's a downside to like spreading. You get to try different things. And if you can like hold a note halfway decent, you can play in a group with people if there's other strong players. But yeah, like it's great. I love it. It opened up a lot of doors and I got a lot of cool like musical experiences. But it was, yeah, I definitely wouldn't say like, man, I'm really, really good at this thing. Like,
well, I think it's interesting though to kind of shift, like to turn that a little bit in like the conversation. Having that generalist skill set though, I think, you know, we can argue if we look to the next steps of like prepared you to fall into this sort of producer field for Daniel, like going into the movie aspect. Like, you know, you weren't the person who's like, look, I can only do bass. I'm really amazing at bass, but that's all I can pull off. Instead, it seemed from what I could observe that it allowed you to kind of be the glue a lot of the times and wherever there needed a little bit of spot filling.
yeah. I think being able to fill a role is important and like not letting your ego ever get in the way, because it's all about like, you know, just what kind of needs to happen. And sometimes you got to make coffee and sometimes you're in front of the camera, you know, it's just like that's part of, I think, the magic of like working on independent features to kind of switch from music to film, right? Like, and why it's so cool, the film festival, because it's such a great opportunity to give, because participating in low budget features, the great thing is you don't need a lot of money. You need like a halfway decent camera, someone that knows how to put the footage together, some halfway decent, like a microphone, whatever. Right. And you can make a movie with your friends, you can make something happen. And, I think there's a lot of power in that. And I think a lot of that comes with when people come together that are, interested in collaboration, low on the ego, and not just saying I'm just the bass player, right? It's like having that openness in the creative process to be like, oh, what needs to happen? Okay, cool. I'll try that. Like, how terribly can I fail?
Yeah, that's absolutely the right take on it. I mean, it's an extrapolation of that GarageBand approach when doing the music. Is now it's just like, all right, maybe I'm like, I've got a little more skill at being the director. Maybe I've got a little bit more at the editing. Like, let's work together as a group on this and like, all put the little bit of that spice that it makes like the goulash that wants to come out.
Exactly. The goulash that is art.
Yeah. So the Hippie Cream you're settling into, that is, do you meet Daniel before that point, or are you already in Hippie Cream by the time you and Daniel connect?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in it by the time Daniel and I connect. Fairly quickly after getting involved with Hippie Cream, like Daniel kind of comes on the scene just through mutual friends. And obviously like Hemet's a small enough town. And interestingly enough, I had known about Daniel because a guy I was in a band with was like, oh, I know this guy who's really into movies back in high school. And like, he could do our music video, but then nothing ever came of it. And I never met him. But then like fast forward to like 3 years later, and I do connect with Daniel. And then it was just like, oh, wow, here's someone who's like so passionate about this particular art form that I don't know anything about. I didn't know anyone who like operated cameras, that edited stuff, that put films together. And when he showed me his first film, I was just like kind of blown away, because I was like, oh, wow. And like the idea of like the multiple takes and the angles and like just the whole piecing together of like a film or a show or anything visual. It was really exciting. It was really cool because it was just something I knew nothing about.
So you connect with Daniel at this point. You've been doing the music, and then Daniel throws out this idea of doing a movie around Hippie Cream. And I remember I knew him a little bit at the time. Like we had split off for a little bit just with schools and stuff, and then touching base with him. And that's my introduction to Hippie Cream as well. As I'm like, what is this band? Like, okay, what's going on? We're doing a movie about what? What are pudding babies? Can you explain any of this to me? And that's where I met you, and you were the main character in the movie. You're Marty for Marty's Magnificent Day-Glo Dream-A-Thon. Was that the conversation point? Was he just like, you're the one I need as the sort of the main character?
Yeah, I think like out the gate, like I was the only one, like obviously I'd never acted before, and I think you watch it and that's obvious, but it's also was like, it was fun. And I think I had the time and the tie-in to Hippie Cream and like the weird universe. And I think I just fit the bill for like the character that like Daniel was envisioning. Like, because I think the way Daniel casts people is generally more about his connection to them and their connection to his vision versus like, oh, I need like the best actor or I need to do auditions. Like, I think he's generally like, he kind of meets people as he goes through his life journey and he kind of has these ideas and then he's like, oh, so-and-so would be really good in this part. And sometimes those ideas get made and you kind of catch that fish, and other times they're just ideas, but Marty was one that he really wanted to see through, and everyone was in this kind of unique time where they really had the time to dedicate it. And as you know, right, like you turned up and played Barry, and then all the people that donated their time, right, because no one was getting paid. So it was also a really unique time where kind of that momentum caught, and it just kind of worked out for everyone to be really focused for like 3 months on making this movie for like virtually no money.
Yeah, and it was so many people stepping up to just kind of be happy to be involved. Your brother and his wife opened the house up for us to like stay sometimes and interact and work on stuff or film scenes. Like there were people that designed the eyeballs that are used in it that are like big, like paper mache, like wood frames with like straps in them that I'm like, it's amazing that anyone spent so like hours building this thing that's on screen for like, 6 seconds max.
Yeah,
it's so just, like it's crazy stuff. But I will touch on that it was really fun getting to know you through the characters, because I would disagree. I thought you were great as the character. I thought you brought a lot to it, and it was really fun to play the sort of nemesis to you for a couple of the dream sequences, was to be Barry Bruiser against you.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Like
you did really good.
It was funny, weird stuff of like being in the shower and like just sort of like, hey, what's going on? I'm gonna fight you. And, like the weird schoolyard bully scenes, like it was such a funny environment, but it was so welcoming.
And the race, that weird fucking race.
Yeah. Oh my God. I completely forgot about the race. Yeah. But the race we filmed at an elementary school in Hemet, that was it Fruitvale?
No, it was Mike Tennant's school that,
oh, right. It was
it the Christian Academy or something?
The Christian Academy. Yeah. We filmed it back there, and it's digging through buckets of cottage cheese with a key in it. Just a number of very odd events. I think it was an incredibly hot day, so that was a good bonding experience for both of us.
Yeah,
just be like,
I was like,
hey, are you miserable? Yeah, I'm pretty miserable.
Yeah, this is awful. This is so hot. Like, and you see it, we're so sweaty, but it works,
So you work on that with Daniel. Is that the point where you start to kind of see this career connection that might evolve through it with you, or do you do a few more before that kind of becomes more solidified?
No, I think it kind of all happened. That kind of was the jump off point, because I was just finishing up my bachelor's degree in history, like at the same time as we wrapped Marty. And I was playing in a band too, so I was still involved in music. But like through Daniel, I met this guy, Jimbo, who was like filming weddings out in Temecula, right? And then it was like, oh, there's kind of a different way I can approach life with this production experience. And I think Marty was the launch pad for that, because then I understood the equipment more. I understand what it takes to get shots and the whole process of putting a visual like piece together. And it kind of opened the door and the connection to start doing work for Jimbo. And then I graduated, and I kind of had the left or right of like going to teaching or try this route doing production and video work and like stuff like that. And I went with video work because of Marty, because I was like, oh shit, like making stuff this sounds way more fun than being in the classroom, for me at least. It was kind of that like working on Marty kind of opened that new horizon for me, for sure.
I think that's a good thing to look at too, is a conversation I've had with people. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about it, but there's something interesting about having a final product when you make something. Like there's something that's incredibly rewarding about art and that environment of making movies or music, of seeing like, here's a thing that I made, like, or put together. And yeah, there might be thousands or hundreds of people that are involved in it, but it's still you built this thing. You know, it's the same way that construction can be really rewarding, because you know, I used to drive around with a grandfather who'd be like, oh, I built that stage over there, or I built that building over there. There's a rewarding element of you've crafted something. And sometimes we fall into jobs that allow us to do things, but everything's ephemeral. You know, teaching is an amazing skill, but sometimes you don't get to see the outcome until years later if you're lucky. So I think it's really fascinating that, like, you know, hopefully the people listening to this and they're getting interested in film can be aware of, like, that's an indescribable feeling, is to see something that you've done, and especially to see it on the screen. Like, oh.
Yeah, like the premiere. I don't know if you remember the premiere for Marty at the Hemet Theatre, though, and that was such a cool night. Like, you're so nervous. It's like everything, and you're literally screening to your friends and family. So no matter what, it's a pretty safe crowd. Like, they're not going to friggin' boo you unless like everyone hates you already. So it's pretty low stakes, but you're still nervous, you know, and it's such a cool experience. And then when it's all said and done, you know, like, you get to kind of be like, cool, like, up on the big screen, like, that's all the work we did, and people respond to it well. And there's an element of like showcasing your work that just feels nice, like a craftsmanship, or the ability to say, look, you heard about it, or you watched us doing all this weird stuff, and it was like so long in the making, right? It was like 3 months of production that summer, and then like one more whack during the winter, and then Daniel was editing the whole year. So it was like a year and some change from beginning to end. And then Hippie Cream doing the soundtrack for it, and all the work, right? And you get to show it to everyone and be like, there it is. And it's an amazing experience. And I think it's like everyone can have their brand of that, right? Whether that's building a building or painting a painting or like just cooking something or whatever. But it's nice to, I think, instill that in people. And I think that's another great opportunity of the film festival, of like giving, even if you think I don't have a great idea or something, there's something so nice about, look, just get your friends together. If you're interested in film, try something, even if it's dumb, who cares? Because showing it to people is such a fun experience, and you're only going to grow and learn from it.
Yeah, there's absolutely a chance to find a passion you maybe didn't even know you had.
Exactly, right? Right. It might be like, oh my God, I loved holding the boom mic, or I loved playing with the audio to try and clean up that weird wind noise, right? And then how you can carry that into other skill sets, even if you never work on another film again, right? Into your professional life, or if you're going to college, or like anything that you choose to do moving forward. Like, I don't think those experiences are wasted, or that they necessarily leave you.
Not at all. I mean, so much of what people see is the final product on things. So, you know, their familiarity with movies are, I saw a movie in a theater. And it's sometimes hard to realize the giant equation that sort of had to be tapered down to get to that final point, like all of the steps and people involved. And so it's really fun to be a part of that. And I also think, kind of like you mentioned, people might discover they like something that might seem mundane or kind of uninteresting to other people, but there's so much there. Like, there's studies that you can find of people being editors and entering the flow state, and being, you know, people who have ADHD or concentration issues, all of a sudden just in love with this idea of like, oh, I've just edited something for 3 hours and I don't know where time went. Because I just entered that flow state.
Yeah, I think it's really healthy. I think it's really important to find things that can get you into that flow state, because so much of life can pull you out of that. But I think if you can find work, whatever that is, right, like, that gives you that sense of satisfaction, and like that, because there is a relaxation in focusing on a task. And I think there's something really satisfying about taking something from beginning to end. That I think, whether it's a hobby or whether it's how you make a paycheck, is really nice to have in your life.
Yeah. And I think something that stands out to me is you and Daniel, and a lot of the other people in the Marty Fishman productions really found that point of, how do you do a job that also allows you to pay for your hobby? And so when did you guys start establishing that, as you kind of, you're working with Jimbo, you're starting to do your own things? What did that deviation point look like?
I think it was like finishing Marty, the film, was like a really big eye-opening moment of like, cool, like, I want to kind of keep doing this. And the best way to do that is probably like figure out how to also make some money, because I also get that, like, all right, Marty's probably not going to make $1 million, but it's fun to make that stuff. You know, it's like making your own like scrapbook at certain points in your life. And and you have the skill set and the know-how, so that it's donating the time and skills is fine. That doesn't necessarily cost you anything, but buying the time, buying yourself the time to do that work, and I think we all wanted to like move out of our parents' house and like be, have to be adults. So you got to also get real about like, okay, cool. Like Hollywood's not knocking for me, but I can like go shoot weddings. I can sell services to live events, right? Like there's so many avenues that these production skills can be translated to. And I think what happened after Marty was Dan had to go to college, right? He went to film school and finished his things. I kept working with Jimbo and kind of learned some trade skills from him. And then when Dan got done with college, we were kind of like, cool, let's get a plan together. And we decided to start selling audiovisual services, which was kind of an amalgamation of like everything we had learned up to that point, right? The audio component, the visual component. And so then we just started selling like services of running these 3-day teaching conferences and stuff like that. And as a result, that gives you the opportunity to be like, cool, like work, do what you need to do to be like, quote unquote, responsible. But then also great. Now we bought enough time to take 2 weeks off to work on an album or work on a short film. And we have the budget to like get the stuff together to make it happen, to rent the gear you need, right? It's like, it's just constantly figuring out how do I make the time to do this stuff? Because it only becomes more challenging as you get older. So that energy and enthusiasm you have when you're like in your late teens, early 20s is a lot more prevalent than when you're say in your 30s and you're trying to like figure out, okay, how do I jigger the schedule to like make this work? So making money as well as trying to stay creative when you're not making money off your creativity per se, it's a balancing act you have to juggle.
That's fascinating. I think too, which is kind of a really appreciable thing that you guys did by doing that, though, is your craft is still being sort of defined by your job. It might be rote to a certain degree, but they're still figuring out things. There's challenges that come up that are still going to be directly translatable to when you do the hobby aspect of it. So I really sort of admire finding that ground of like, we're doing this thing, but it's still kind of making us better at the thing we want to be doing, and vice versa.
Yeah, like think about like Steven, right? One of the other guys who's one of the founders, right? He is working for a special effects company out in Los Angeles, and all of that incredible pro-grade skill he is developing is now translatable to when we can carve out that bit of time to make something creative, right? It's like so different from when he was just working in After Effects and just starting out to now he's using stuff I don't even know about that is like, for big Hollywood productions, but that's a skill set he has. So the development of all of us and our whatever particular skill sets professionally we're using, all translate when we can get together to make something happen.
I think maybe that's something that I didn't touch on yet in the podcast, but I think is important to stand out to is there is that amazing sort of friendship that's underlining for everyone there, where you guys are spreading out and picking up these other skills, but there's always this desire to sort of come back together and craft these things. There's always that joy of coming back to the garage band again.
Yeah. It's like Hemet, it's like you kind of have these relationships that you don't really, I haven't found, like you make friends and you make connections, but the bonding you do in that kind of like oven of Hemet or whatever, like, the baked in, like you can connect with people that you really vibe with, and wherever life takes you, I feel like we've always kind of come back together no matter how far we go. Like I'm not even in America, right? But like I'm still, and Steven went off to Fairfield, Iowa for a while to get to do a David Lynch film program. And he was gone for like two years or something. Like and Daniel has had his stints where he's gone off and had his adventures and education and stuff. So, but it always kind of circles back to like, oh, we need to reconnect again. We need to work on something. We need to do something.
So you bring up a great kind of a transition point on the being out of America. Like, take me to that. Like, so you and I kind of didn't talk for a little while just because, life is
life,
a thing that blocks everything all the time. But how did you end up transitioning out, and kind of like what was the experience?
Okay, so I came to Ireland on a holiday, a 2-week trip, because I'd always wanted to get back, and I was kind of finally in a spot where it was like I could do it. So I came out to the west coast of Ireland, to County Galway, and it was just, I thought I was going to try and do the whole island. I had the rental car, and I kind of had this whole plan. And then I wound up meeting my now wife, Neve, and that kind of grounded me there. Like, we met the first few days because I was going to play some music. Like, I brought my guitar, and I was like, cool, good way to meet people, play some coffee shops, the open mics, like just do that thing, because like, why not? And my wife, Neve, is a musician, and she was the only musician who like responded to like my Facebook messages before I got out there about booking a gig, which was nice. And so we met up for a drink, and then that was it. You know, we just totally fell for each other, and we spent the whole trip together. And then I left kind of knowing that like I had found the person I wanted to marry, or spend my life with, at least, because it was all just kind of there. It was just really obvious to me. And after 2 years of back and forth, I just decided to move out there. And that was, so then my life has been everything since that decision. Yeah.
That's awesome, though. I mean, like, that's the kind of story people write movies about.
Yeah. But then, you live it, and it's even better, right?
Yeah, it doesn't end in 2 hours.
It doesn't end in 2 hours, and they're not riding off into the sunset. Then you're just like being married, and it actually doesn't feel any different. And you're just like, oh yeah, this is just life. I'm just living.
That's fantastic. Because I didn't even personally know that story, like, of how that all connection happened. So that's awesome.
Oh yeah. It was cool. It's like, it's been obviously like, it's a big transition, but Hemet is kind of the North Star. It's like, there's always that drawback. And like the record she put out after meeting me was, she called Hemet, because she was so struck when she came to Hemet and kind of met all the people and the whole sense of it, So she was very even taken by like the Inland Empire and that whole place, Yeah. So it's been really cool, but yeah, it's always, Hemet's kind of the motherland in this really bizarre way. Like, no matter how far away I am, there's always that interest or that pull. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating because they always talk about, like the adage of you can't go home again kind of thing. And yet there's always this kind of pull thread that sees a lot of us back there or interacting there, be it family or whatnot. But there's something that of an unearthed gem that it sometimes feels like. And I really hope this festival kind of allows people to see that, or people that are already there allows them to kind of feel a little bit more of a connection there, that hopefully will allow them to have these same types of stories, these same types of events.
So. Yeah, I really hope that's, because the Hemet Theatre too is so cool. It's such a unique piece of history in the town, and it would just be such a shame to not really get it to be this fully, I mean, I know it's fully operational. They put on concerts and events, and it's like really, really great, but to really get it back up to spec for films and screenings, I think just what an amazing venue that like not a lot of them are around. It's theaters that old. Just to get it going again would be so cool, because Hemet deserves it. I think Hemet is such a great place, and I think if anything we can do to just shine more light on the creative individuals that are there, and just giving back to the community, at least in the arts.
Absolutely. So we've kind of almost caught up to sort of the present Wesley, right?
Mm-hmm.
So take us through, like, what is life looking like for you now? What are things that you're kind of aspiring out to?
Well, the Hemet Film Festival, obviously, like, I really want that to be like,
solid,
solid. Yeah. And every year we're doing it, every year it gets maybe a little bit more, we get more people, more involved with like the schools on it, and partnering with them to really bring that educational aspect in, and supports to like students that really want to get involved in like production or filmmaking. And then just kind of like, I think just living, just like trying to keep the dream alive in terms of just you're working, but you're also still working on creative projects in your free time and keeping those hobbies and interests alive. A lot of that stuff. Yeah. Like, and just kind of whenever the next trip back to Hemet is, and like that kind of thing, I feel like that's kind of my life now because, you're living and you're working and you're doing the day to day. And like, I'm editing, I work with like lawyers and stuff. Like I do lawyer videos, essentially. That's like, but it's only because I can draw a direct thread back to that summer making Marty. Everything has been a domino from that moment and meeting Daniel and all that. And I think what's interesting is all of us, like you, me, and Steven and Miles, like Daniel is quite a match point, or like not a match point, but he's quite a lighter of a fuse in a way.
He's
like,
momentum generator.
Right. Like I think he's kind of had an effect on all of us in a way, and it's all because of his love of film. I think that's a huge component of that impact, because it's like, it's one thing to like a movie, right? And I think if you can, maybe you're not making the big Hollywood blockbuster, or maybe you're not working on like the cool Quentin Tarantino film, or like whatever your brand is, right? The indie flick, any of that stuff. I think if you really love film and then you can somehow be working in production in any way that is paying your bills, like I think that's a massive thing. I think that's a pretty cool, like, career path to be involved in. Yeah,
absolutely. There's so much of it is tied to passion and kind of a joy that brings into it. And life can be hard and painful. And sometimes it's tough to like just sort of feel stuck or maybe sort of circling things. But being able to always find these points of passion is something that I think stands out to me specifically about film, but like music and art in general is just, like you said, Daniel's always had this passion. And like, I met him in middle school and it's carried through still, like seeing him and this, like, almost laser focused at times on this. This is what I love. This is my dream. This is what I found. And I wish everyone could experience that. There'd be nothing better than if everyone had that moment of like epiphany of like, this is the thing. This is the thing. And so that I'm with you where I think the future, I really hope it holds us being able to interact with students and help them stumble into what that thing might be for them. Like what will be that passion that drives them forward.
Yeah, and that can be like acting, right? It doesn't have to be all about like, oh, you want to be behind the camera or the writer or the director or editor or whatever. Like that's the great thing about, I think, what the film festival offers is there's so many different role opportunities and like things you can be involved in, even if you don't want to be on camera or anything like that. It's just across the board, there's so much to explore. And I think it's just such a cool opportunity that, I think it's something that's kind of missing when I think about like the schools in Hemet. Like they offer so much in the way of choir, of drama, like there's so many great programs, but is anyone really trying to nurture like a film skill building like thing at the school level? And that's what I'm most excited about, of trying to really just up that game and give that opportunity and those resources and that knowledge to just give people the opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many jobs in it, so many different little things that you can find that is insane. And I'm with you for the schools. I think it's really important. Everything in school right now is STEM. But when that started, it used to be STEAM with an A in there for the arts: science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And arts, unfortunately, has really kind of withered on the vine. But I think that is doing a disservice to students when, you could be doing a podcast, you could be doing movies, you could be doing these things, and there's a technical sort of science and engineering skill set developed in there that's still part of the art. And I really wish that we start seeing schools come back to that, because I think it's a rewarding place to be.
Yeah, and I think you learn technical skills and problem solving and this aptitude for like things that like maybe it's not like a math equation you're solving or like a biology thing, but or grammar or whatever. Like these more quantifiable things that schools are set up to teach, and they're very important. But I also think there's a lot of skill sets you can develop learning a software, learning how to color correct, learning how to white balance something, or managing audio, right? There's so many things baked in, I think, to doing an artistic practice that are really, really great life skills that translate to loads of different areas and fields.
Absolutely. I think something that, kind of doubling back on conversation around your producerial work is it's that same thing of like critical thinking. So much of getting a movie to succeed is that thing of like, this plan we had isn't happening the way we thought. What do we do to solve this issue? Like there's tons of times I think going back to, we didn't even mention, but I think one of the last times we worked together was the Mr. Whittier's Hemet, right?
Yeah.
And I remember talking with you a little bit of like going and trying to secure Calico Ghost Town to do some shooting and stuff. And like there was a whole series of events that happened there of just like, this isn't working. How do we get this solved? This is working. All right. Now I've got to look at horses. Like, how do I get insurance for that?
Yeah. It's like all these things that can come up because you're dealing with a lot. It's people, and you're dealing with situations, and like it was having to get the insurance sorted out last minute because some box didn't get ticked correctly, but they didn't know, and I didn't know until but it's great. Like you're under pressure. Yeah, you're stressed. There's like a lot of moving pieces, but you can figure things out. And worst case scenario, you don't get the shoot done, which sucks. But that's also that's real life too. Those are real life lessons where you're like, yep, that can happen. And I think that's a good skill set too. Getting something over the line or throwing a Hail Mary is good, but it's also there's learning and failure too, which I think is important in life because there will be failure like that's going to happen.
Absolutely. I think it also teaches a really good, valuable skill of figuring out pivoting and kind of learning of like, there are so many movies and stories where you're like, oh, we had to do this thing suddenly because we lost light or X, Y, or Z, and it turned out better. We pivoted into an even better direction.
Yes, that is also very true. The pivot.
Yeah, and so I think that's something that'll be really fun to talk with students and kind of just filmmakers, like nascent filmmakers in general, of like, no film's going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect the way you planned it. It's not going to be perfect the way you edit it. None of that's going to happen. But it becomes beautiful for that reason. It's almost the theater idea of the unifying moment. You have this unique thing that happens only in this one way that you can't capture again. And it sort of helps define the environment or the film or the art.
Yeah, and what the viewer takes away from it, that kind of that ethereal quality or whatever the thing that like art makes you feel, whether it's good or not, whether you like it or not, whatever, right? But it's like there's a vibe and a feeling and things that are made by people that a viewer or someone exposed to it walks away sensing.
Absolutely. And I think the film festival will allow that because being able to see your short in an audience, see other people react to it.
Gosh.
There's something amazing there.
Yeah. And you learn so much. So I think for like, especially like filmmakers starting out or people just making their first short or whatever, it's such an educational experience because you'll learn more watching an audience react to your work than you would watching it 100 times by yourself or with one of your buddies. Like it's totally like seeing just strangers cold exposed to your work, I think informs so much of where you go next.
Absolutely. Well, Wesley, I can't tell you enough how glad I am you're able to come on this and speak with us. And I really enjoyed sharing all these stories. The film festival will be November 10th for the sort of opening night bash. And then the 11th will be the actual, November 11th will be the actual one for the events and the blocks. And then after that, we're looking at October for the years after. So we hope to see you there.